So yeah, thank you very much, Joe, for the introduction. The less I talk, the better it is. So I can concentrate more on the major topic of this presentation. And yeah, good afternoon or good morning, depending where you're joining in, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for your interest in this presentation. In this talk, I would like to discuss with you on the topic of pitfalls and major advantages of AI in medical devices and how we think the future regulation of AI might look like. So let's jump directly into the agenda and see what we are going to talk about. So I would like to start with some current examples and see where AI is actually doing a great job and where they don't do such a great job, and what are the reasons for the differentiating in their performances. We then jump to some medical examples and try to evaluate what are the issues with AI and how we can deal with those AI-specific issues within the medical device development lifecycle. A topic I would like also to mention are attacks on AI that brings a new level of security issues in medical devices. And last but not least, I will look at some of the legal requirements of AI. By the way, don't misunderstand why I'm always looking that way and that way, because I have two monitors, but the camera is over there, but I have no text over there. So I have to sometimes look over there and see which slide I'm just running. So I'm just checking that I have the right slide. Yeah, before we start with the actual presentation, and I promise you this is the last time I bring up this example because we are seeing some light at the end of the Corona turmoil. So that is definitely the last time I bring that example. What I would like to ask you, what I want to ask you in this example is, what do you think? Who was one of the first researchers who identified the outbreak of Corona? And second is, what I also ask you to think about, what do you think? When did that information was shared by the research group who identified the outbreak of Corona? Just a few seconds, think about it. And yeah, unfortunately, that's an online session, so I can't check it with you. So please check it out for yourself. Well, as you know, the topic of the today presentation, my guess is you have been absolutely right. It was not, of course, the World Health Organization, and although the US CDC was actually a little bit more faster, however, it was also not the first organization. It was actually an artificial intelligence made by the Canadian company Blue Dot. The AI has identified already back in 2019 December that something is going wrong in the Wuhan region, while the whole world was still questioning any human-to-human transmission. In January 2020, the AI already warned its clients in December 2019 to not travel to their respective regions. And you might ask yourself, how does the AI identify the issue? Well, it comes through the data and newspapers which was published in animal and plant disease networks, and also it runs through all the publications in Facebook and other social networks, and it identified that something is going on in this region. And now comes to the interesting part of this story. Based on the access of the AI on flight ticketing systems, it precisely predicts that the next hotspot for the virus will be Korea, Japan, Singapore, and Philippines, which was absolutely correct. If you remember at the beginning of last year, it was those regions who was affected strongly right after China. So, and it gets even better. It is, by the way, not the first time that the AI system has precisely predicted an outbreak of some kind of virus in any of the region worldwide. However, not every time the people believe it. And if you look at this example, you might identify, well, the AI did actually quite a good job. So why didn't we listen to it? And if we had listened to it, we might be in a better situation. Who knows? However, we learned to know nobody really listened to the AI. And the question should be, why? Why didn't we listen to the AI? Why didn't we accept its prediction? And the answer to this question is quite easy, and it is the main message of this presentation: trust. We do not trust AI, and we will see during the ongoing of this presentation there are good reasons why we should, of course, not trust AI without a second opinion at least. At the same time, there are very good reasons why we should have to build trust into the AI system, as they are already doing a great job, as we see in this example. So let me stick to this not so nice incidents with the corona pandemic and check which other areas of our everyday life had been affected by AI systems. So actually, this pandemic was a real-world test scenario for AIs to prove their robustness and stability and also performance. Because it was one of the first times we have an incident which was not a daily scenario, so we could check how the AIs performing those cases in these or in those not normal cases. So if you look at the big companies around the world, the majority of the warehousing activities in these companies, for instance, Amazon, are handled by AI. Amazon can basically predict what you're going to buy within the next future days and place those products that you are looking at in their warehouses. So they basically know what you're going to do to get in the future, which is excellent for me. I love that function. But the good thing is those AI models are also designed to respond on changes. For instance, if the AI is accessing the weather information, the AI would actually know, well, we will have a strong winter, so I will put some winter-related product in the warehouse. For instance, I don't know, hats and gloves and I don't know, medicines for having a cold and so on. However, the AI sometimes doesn't work as they are supposed to do, so they cannot, although they are implemented to react on those changes, sometimes this reaction is not working good. And the reason for that is not what you think. It's not because the AI is performing bad. And the major reason for this mismatch between the performance of the device in normal cases and different cases is the human craziness. Imagine we are having a world pandemic and we might not have enough food to eat, right? So, which was the case at the end of 2019. So what is the first thing you want to buy in that case? Of course, you don't want to buy food or essential products. Of course, you want to buy toilet paper as much as you can. And this is actually what happens at the beginning of last year, shown in a strong request of toilet paper, as you see in this graph from Amazon, which shows Amazon most searched products. So within a few days, the request for toilet paper jumps into the cloud. And for whatever reason, the logical AI could not predict this obvious demand of humans for toilet paper. And although we had enough toilet paper produced, we didn't have enough in our warehouses because the AI didn't even dream about to fill their warehouse with toilet paper. It was actually expecting us to buy essential product like food and wasn't able to react on this request for toilet paper quite a long time. And this example shows actually how fragile and unstable AI systems are when they are confronted to unexpected changes or unexpected behavior, or just in this case, human madness. And this is something we'll look later on when we assess medical device AIs. So the researchers have found that AI systems are in many cases, well, not many, it's not the correct wording, in some cases very unstable compared to conventional software algorithms. So stability is the second message beside of trust, which we will have in our mind when we talk about AI in medical field. So now let's have a look at some real medical examples. With imaging, as you know, we are able to diagnose diseases even we feed it by ourselves. So you have the medical imaging. With imaging, you can look into the body. You don't need to open the patient, and you might even be able to identify incidences or diseases that you do not know it by yourself. So unfortunately, even with medical imaging, many of those diseases are identified in a very advanced stage, so that in that case, it's sometimes not possible to treat this disease anymore. And one of those examples is, for instance, the detection of osteoarthritis. Until now, it is really difficult possible to detect osteoarthritis until pain has occurred or you have already bone damage, which is visible in the medical image. However, there are researchers around Kundo et al., and they have implemented an AI system that predicts osteoarthritis already 3 years before any symptoms can be detected in medical image. So we see here two examples. On the left side of the image, we see patient who will develop osteoarthritis within the next 2 years. And on the right side, we see image of patients or MRI image of patient who will not develop osteoarthritis within the next 2 years. Those patients have no pain, no problems at all. However, the AI can predict from this image that, well, those patients will have, those patients will don't have. And the bad part of the story, or the bad news here, is that no human doctor is able to confirm or reject this diagnosis, because we don't understand what the AI is really seeing. For us, the images are identical. We don't see any difference between the two. And now comes to the real question. Imagine you, hopefully you're not, but imagine one patient is giving the diagnosis, say, well, the AI has identified you have osteoarthritis and you might undergo some surgical intervention or some drug you need to take. And it is only based on the decisions that the AI have been made. So there is no doctor who will say, well, yes, that's true, I can confirm it. No, they cannot. Will say, well, I don't know, you can, you cannot, because I don't understand what the AI decided. I have my doubts if I would take a surgical intervention in that case, but yeah, that's a question you need to ask yourself. And when you do that decision, if you want to trust the AI, you need to think about, if the doctor cannot, or if there is no human in the loop who can confirm or reject the decision, how is it possible, how is he able to identify failures in the programming? How can the doctor identify a false diagnosis if he doesn't understand the decision? And you always need to consider that those AI systems are working with a specific limited precision. So this AI system predicts osteoarthritis with a precision of, I think, around 80–70%, so 87%, approximately 90%. However, there is still 10% chance of a misdiagnosis. Do you want to undergo that risk? That's a question. And as long as we don't understand the technology, we will not trust it. And what missing trust will lead in what risk of not having trust into AI we see with the vaccination process currently, where the vaccination system is just not trusted. Many people do not want to vaccinate themselves because they do not trust the vaccines that have been developed to help us, actually. And whenever I have such a discussion, with someone say, well, I would believe it, but I don't think so. Imagine you're going to a doctor and ask you to, I don't know, take some drugs and come tomorrow again, and tomorrow you need to go undergo a surgery. And you ask the doctor, well, why do I need that? Why do you think I need a surgery? I don't want that. What is the reason? I say, well, because I tell it to you, I guess you will not believe that person. At least you will not trust his opinion, and you will go to the second doctor to get an approval of the decision making. Actually, I would say that person is very rude if you say, I don't explain it to you. I would say it's a matter of a basic principle of human communication to explain to self, to your opponent, in that case, to your patient from the doctor's side, or is it AI to the patient? So, sorry, it's too much. And it's not only AI system, medical devices. Let's have a look at some, well, medical devices that we usually have with us. So those wearables who are, of course, considered to be medical devices, not the health apps or health devices. So we have, for instance, the Apple Watch that constantly collects your health care related data and use AI to make decisions, or even making diagnosis. And as we can see from the example on the right side of the slide, that's actually working very good, with most prominent example being identification of several heart diseases, and by this saving patients' lives. So what we see is that the example we see on the left side of the slide is not very far away, and technically actually already possible. And I'm really looking for such an assistant, because I definitely always overwork, never take care of my health or increase health risk. So I actually would need it. However, from the information that is covered by those wearables, you can actually identify other very personal information about your health that you might not want to share with other people. Even if you're a highly connected teenager, you most probably wouldn't like that information to be shared to your mother. And in that case, it's not only your mother or your dad or whoever, you don't really want to share, or some of us don't want to share those personal information to multi-dollar, billion-dollar companies, and worst case companies who actually make business with your data, such as Google or Alibaba or even smaller companies. So what we do need to consider in a medical device is not only correct functioning of the medical device, so it's called safety. We also need to look at what the AI or the medical device is doing with your data, which is called your security or privacy of your data. And this is of special interest when we are looking into the rising number of health applications, especially in the European market. And when I discuss this topic with friends and colleagues and clients, the reactions are mostly identical. Typically, they state that it's too personal to put their health information on those databases. Well, I actually do not agree to that. I would argue that our technology are already personal. And just look at the skins we are using or we are putting on our phone, which in most cases are in line with our character. You can guess which one is mine. So it's a small hint, it's not a pink one. So the technology around it is already very personal, and we are feeding up those devices or healthcare related data, and those healthcare related data are already put into the databases of those companies. And I'm absolutely sure that interacting with our healthcare related data and AI in medical field is the future, and the future is already here. And what we healthcare professionals are doing with those data is much more complicated than what Amazon, for instance, is doing with their AIs in warehousing activities. So controlling AI is necessary in medical field. However, at the same time, regulations should not stop innovation. Unfortunately, some of the upcoming regulation might exactly have that effect, but we'll come to that topic a little bit later. Now let's have a quick look at some of the basics of AI, and I don't want to go into technical details here too much, so let's quickly explain the differences between AI system and which AI system we are most often being seeing in the medical field. And actually, defining artificial intelligence is very difficult because we still don't even understand the definition of human intelligence. However, one common definition I found very pleasing is the one of Kaplan, and it states that AI system is a computational intelligence that perform cognitive tasks that are usually performed by intelligent human beings. This is, by the way, very close to the ISO IEC 2382 definition. And yeah. And when we talk about AI in this presentation, I'm usually referring to machine learning. And machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence. It's basically based on a model that is trained using training data. Artificial neural networks are a set of algorithms used in the implementation of AI, which are inspired by biological neural networks such as human brain. They mostly are used to recognize patterns in data sets. Deep learning, again, is a subset or evolution of machine learning, and the use of deep refers to the number of layers which you see within the neural network, which must be at least 3 or more than 3 layers to be called a deep learning neural network. Deep learning algorithms are mostly used for feature detection or classification, and typically those systems achieving at least the same level or even exceeding human performance when it comes to feature detection. I think that's enough for the theory behind it. And to understand why we need additional consideration when it comes to AI in a medical device, we need to understand what is the difference between conventional program software and AI. And if we look at the regular software, which you see on the left side of the slide, it receives commands from a user, and the software then performs operation on this data according to a predefined and human line-by-line program algorithm. The algorithm is verified and validated as part of the usual software lifecycle process, so you know what is coming out is what you are expecting it to do. Machine learning, on the other hand, works completely different. The AI learns from data by a training process, and by this a model is created, and this model formulates decisions which are based on experience, and those experience are gained from the training that was performed during the training process. Good. I don't want you to go too much into technical details again, but what I would like always to mention here is in this scenario with AI, where you take data to train the model, the data itself takes the same role as source code in conventional software. That means for manufacturers, you need to consider also the training data during your configuration management implementation. So your configuration management AI should also include the data that has been used for the training of the model. Good. Let me quickly have a look on this very controversial topic, which are the understanding of what the AI is doing. So in my opinion, the biggest issue with AI is their very nested and nonlinear behavior that are making them highly non-transparent. And for this reason, these types of AI are called black box AIs. One prominent example of black box behavior you most probably everyone knows about, which is the Go championship between the human champion Lisa Doll and the artificial intelligence from Google, AlphaGo. I think it was in 2016. And the game was observed by other experts and other champions. And when AlphaGo, the AI system, did the 37th move in a game, all the observing expert and champions say, well, the AI will definitely use, because that move makes no sense. It's actually stupid. And this is actually a quote. They say, this move is not from an intelligent human. Nobody understands the creativity around this move. However, it was a deciding move to win the game, but just nobody understands what the AI is doing, why the AI do this move, and what is the creativity behind this move. And the question here is, if you cannot understand what the AI is doing and why the AI decide on a specific prediction, how can we trust it? In the case of a game, well, you don't really care. But especially in a medical field, where it is sometimes a decision on life or death, you need to have the trust into the AI's decision. You need to identify, can you trust the decision that is made by the AI? You need to know, can you, in worst case, detect an error? And the answer to these questions actually no, as long as you have not an explanation of the model. As long as the AI model is not explainable for you, you cannot identify a wrong diagnosis. You cannot identify any failures of the system because you don't understand what the AI is doing. And at the same time, I will come to the EU regulation later on, but the current regulations that are in place and already published, you do find some additional requirements that might apply to AI system. For instance, the GDPR have some aspects that consider automatic decision-making machines. So in short, if the data, the data protection regulation requires that if you are affected by automatic decision, you must be able to follow, you must be able to understand, and you must have the possibility to take actions against the decision. For instance, how could you take actions against the AI decision for not getting a credit from your bank? Or how can you take actions against an AI decision? Well, this patient will not get a specific therapy. If you can't take action against, if you don't understand it, and put yourself in a situation where I say, well, that patient will not get this expensive therapy, and it doesn't give you an explanation why. You want to know why, because you want to take actions against this decision if it's against your will in that case. So, oops, sorry. Additional requirements are found in MDCG guidance document, but again, that's going too far here. So let me quickly jump over this slide. Let's look at the current medical device regulation and also in vitro diagnostic regulation. So everything I explained you here basically on the same level applies to in vitro diagnostics. And in Annex 1 of the respective regulation, you have requirements which must be fulfilled by the medical device or in vitro diagnostic device. And in 70.1, GSPR 70.1, you have requirements for performance, reliability, and performance and repeatability of the medical device, which also includes AI systems. So all, and the question is, as a medical device manufacturer, how can you fulfill those requirements? Well, by verifying and validating the AI system as specified in a very general form in ISO 13485. I know there are better standards for verification and validation, but let's keep it simple and stay with the ISO 13485 definition. And when it comes to AI, there are specific properties you need to consider during the validation and verification of AI model. When you train and verify your AI system, you need to consider two data sets. You have one data set you need to train the model, and you have another data set to verify you. And those data sets must be independent from each other. And one very, very important aspect that some manufacturers sometimes forget is the term validation. Validation is used by medical device industry and also by data scientists, so those AI experts. And both of them, unfortunately, understand completely something different when it comes to validation. For us, medical device expert, it means confirmation that the requirement for specific intended purpose are constantly fulfilled, right? So for AI expert, it means completely different. It means that data curation, it also could mean data validation, or it means also model tuning. So when you're adjusting the model parameters, the whiting values, you are also talking validation. So it's really not a defined term which is same level applicable to all industries. So please keep an eye on that. When the AI expert testing, we have validated systems that might not be what you are understanding of validation. But at the end of the time, you have to do a validation at the end of the V model. So usually that shouldn't be an issue. Next question is, how much data do you need? And unfortunately, that question is very difficult to answer. The prediction models that are available right now apply only to very simple AI systems, and there is no scientific way to identify how much data are necessary for complicated models in advance. However, when you do the verification and validation of real-world data, considering your targeted patient population, you then have objective evidence for the performance characteristics of a model, and then you can say, well, I had enough data or not. Another question is quality of data being used for the training and verification and validation. And for this, I always use this garbage model you most probably are aware of. If you put garbage in your system, well, you get garbage out of your system. And the same is true with AI. If you train your model with garbage data, you will receive a garbage performing model. However, what does it mean to have quality of data? For instance, with medical AI system, you are very often dealing with labeled data sets, which are grouped under the supervised learning methods. And the labeling process, however, is very boring and very repetitive task. So you have thousands, sometimes millions of images, and you need to sit there and check if this is a I don't know, abnormal or normal tissue, and this is boring and it's repetitive, and humans tend to do mistakes when they are doing repetitive tasks. And we are subjective, right? While someone might identify one image as normal, another one who will say, no, it's not, it's abnormal. So what you need to do, you need to define thresholds for the labeling process. When is data or image considered to be abnormal? When is it normal? And what are the acceptance criteria for accepting image? So what are the, as you know, signal to noise ratio for an image? You need to define it in advance. And who perform the labeling process at all? Can only clinicians do the labeling, or do you can also put technical employees there? That is its justification you need to provide. And where the data is coming from, clinical trace or from Google Image, especially when it comes to security of AI system. We'll look at it later. The source of image can be significant because you are able to change the image in such a way that it bring a security issue in your device. We'll come to that topic later. Oops, another issue you need to consider are bias in data. So the question you need to ask yourself, are the data that you are using for your system to train and to verify your model really representing the real world distribution where you are marketing your device? For instance, we see here one example of an AI system to identify the gender of a person based on his skin color. And the people of color are misidentified 12 times higher probability. And the reason for that is not the performance of the model. Well, actually, it is the performance of the model, but the root cause of the AI's performance is the fact that the model had been trained predominantly with non-colored humans. So for this reason, you introduce a bias into the system, and it works very good with white people, but not with people of color. So you need to define the statistical distribution of the data being used for the training, verification, and validation, and then you need to ensure that those data are representing the targeted patient population. So if you only use data from Japanese patients, that might be okay, but it also might not be okay. And this is a justification you need to provide. We can discuss on this issue later in a question round. So let me quickly look at the risk management process. How much time do I have? So we are good to go. The medical device regulation requires you to implement a risk management process, and relevant harmonized standard for risk management processes, ISO 14971, and then you have additions from the software lifecycle standard, IEC 62/304. However, please do not misunderstand me. 62/304 just add additions to 14971 and does not replace it. And I don't want to go into detail of the risk management, so this is, you should be very aware of it as a medical device manufacturer, but basically you need to identify risk, you need to analyze those risks, and you need to evaluate if you accept it, and if you accept the risk, good. If you do not accept it, you need to mitigate those risks. And at the end of the time, you need to show objective evidence for the effectiveness of the implementation. This is described in the respective standards. However, what do you need to specifically consider when we are dealing with AI systems or medical devices incorporating artificial intelligence? And the thing is getting a little bit messy here, because with medical devices without AI, risk can be assessed from real-world experience with the technologies that you are using already for years. But when when a medical device has AI incorporated into it, that experience is missing, because you don't have the AI system in the market for a long time as you have it with a conventional system. And the missing experience on a device in a real world market increases the potential to not identify an hazard. And additionally, complex AI system, especially black box AIs, and in those cases, it is difficult to identify risks that are associated with this device, because you do not understand the algorithm behind the AI system, so you cannot identify what are the risks. So with the AI system, you have additional level of complexity into the risk identification process. Basically, the risks that are associated with AI system can be grouped in 4 different subcategories, which cover the learning methods, level of autonomy of the AI system, the model being used, and its explainability, and other aspects such as off-labels. You know, if a user of a medical device gets used to it, they tend to off-label use that device. So this foreseeable misuse must be or should be considered in your risk management process. And those risks that we identified before, the quality of data, bias, etc., so on, should be added into this list of risks. Good. One issue I would like to mention in particular when it comes to risk management are stability issues with AI system, which you remember we discussed at the beginning of this presentation when we talk about warehousing activities. Unfortunately, also in medical field we see issues with stability of AI systems. And there is a study from May 2020, and they investigate the stability of AI system used for the reconstruction of MRI and CT image. And the investigation shows that 6 of the most commonly used AI systems for the reconstruction of MRI and CT image were highly unstable. So basically, they could show that tiniest corruption of the input data or changing to the setting of the modality that are basically invisible for human eyes, as you can see in this example here, results in a wide range of artifacts, in worst case removing structure from the original image. Now, imagine the same distortion or the same issue with medical image that you see on that side. Imagine removing, I don't know, abnormal tissue out of the image, and by this not providing the necessary therapy for the patient. And yeah, so those distortions, as I told you before, basically are only available or only visible with AI systems. However, with conventional methods, those distortions were not observed, although the same image had been provided to the conventional reconstruction methods. So stability issues with AI are well known and documented in the literature. However, sometimes not really considered by the manufacturers. Yeah, I'm good to go. So please consider that one. I think I will jump over this slide because that's going too much into detail here. Let me go to the, I think, more interesting part of the presentation when it comes to AI, which is the regulatory framework. So let me quickly summarize what's have been done already in recent years. So basically, all major regulators around the world have already a proposed framework to deal with AI in medical devices. The FDA has already provided a questionnaire where the industry was asked on their opinion on a proposed framework. They have been published in a draft form. Beginning of this year, I think it was January 2021, the FDA had published their action plan on how they want to oversight AI in medical devices, and the action plan consists of 5 major steps. The major one being developing a regulatory framework explicitly for the change control AI that includes also automatically changing AI systems. So those AI systems that are continuously learning, a good machine learning practice, and new methods to evaluate AI systems. Also, the European Union has published a white paper on AI for critical infrastructure. I think it was last year or the year before. No, it was 2020. If I'm not wrong. A few weeks ago, the proposed regulation for AI in critical infrastructure in EU has been published. It's a horizontal regulation, so not the industrial specific one. Medical devices which fall under the high-risk AI systems must undergo a conformity assessment procedure. But the question is, what does it mean for medical devices? Because medical devices are already undergoing a conformity assessment procedure. Well, Article 43 of the proposed regulation explains that those devices can be assessed under MDR and IVDR with some AI extras. However, the question of whether those assessment bodies or notified bodies who perform this assessment will be accredited under a specific scheme, well, that question is really not answered. And considering that the current number of notified bodies are the major bottleneck when it comes to certification of a medical device, that situation might be worsened if additional accreditation is necessary. But I didn't read it out of yet. I hope we will get a response from the regulators soon. And yeah, the result of a conformity assessment procedure under the artificial intelligence proposed regulation is a EU technical documentation certificate, which seems to be complementary to an MDR IVDR certificate, but yeah, we will see that in the future. And also what is very important for the medical device manufacturers, so they have a very broad definition of AI. They also consider knowledge-based systems as an AI, which might lead to the fact that also a really conventional or simple embedded software and electronic thermometer might also undergo an AI assessment. If that approach is good or not, or if you should use a risk-based approach, it's not a definition we as a notified body or test house is doing. We basically refer what the regulators ask us to test. However, it's up to you as a stakeholder to discuss and maybe propose changes to the regulation. You do also find requirements in the AI regulation for error-free and complete data for the training. And so for the training, validation, testing, and verification, of course. However, as you might know, such a requirement for error-free data is technically not possible. Every sensor you're dealing with in a medical field or even in any field has some limitation when it comes to precision. So having error-free data is technically not possible, as to my understanding at least. Also, the requirement of the regulation or proposed regulation, human oversight might not always be practicable, because you do have AI system which advantage is to supersede human performance. So in those cases, if it's really practically possible to have a human oversight, well, that's a definition hopefully we'll get from the regulator soon. And additionally, you are supposed to implement a post-market procedure to proactively collect and review data from the use of your AI system in a market. However, it seems like, from what I understand, that there is a parallel reporting channel being used. So medical device manufacturers have already advisory notice or notification process in place that, well, it's well established and usually works very good. However, it seems like those reportings might be done on parallel reporting channels and might also need other sources to be notified. But yeah, we will see if it's the way it is currently. I understand it, that might mean a lot of additional work for the manufacturers. And yeah, I think that's enough of the EU regulation. Let me check the time. Yeah, I need to finish soon. So also Japan, Korea, Singapore, and China have their respective guidance and regulatory documents in place covering AI topics in medical devices, but it's going too far to explain each of them here. So you have also a question on the standardization side, and there is a lot going on the standardization side. This would way out of the focus or the scope of this short presentation to cover all the many approaches being implemented on the standardization side. However, please feel free to contact us for additional technical meetings or discussion to cover in-depth requirements, either on a regulatory level or standardization level. Yeah. What time is it? Oh yeah, I think we can also, or let me quickly try to summarize this slide as well. So another aspect that is very important for medical devices incorporating AI is the question on accountability of the decisions that are made by an AI. So if a wrong judgment has been done by a human doctor, you usually can trace this wrong judgment back to the doctor. In case of a harm, there's always a way to bring him or her to justice, right? So you do have options to deal with it. However, what happens when AI does the wrong decision? Who is responsible? Is it the manufacturer or the engineer who trains the system? Or let me put it in other words, would you arrest a professor of your medical doctor because the professor provides the students the wrong training? Well, I guess not. However, for us medical device manufacturers, the case is clear. At the end of the time, the legal manufacturer has to validate and verify their system and ensure safety and security. So you are at the end of the time responsible for the safety and security. So I will jump over the other options and let me give you a quick summary of the today talk. As we have seen, we are at the beginning of AI regulation, and as we have also seen, AI systems can bring benefits to our healthcare system. However, implementing new technologies such as an AI in our medical devices can present risks that could risk the patient's safety or patient security, and also not only the patient but also the user of the device. And controlling AI in critical infrastructure is definitely the way to go. However, the regulatory framework shouldn't over-regulate or stop innovation for safe and secure medical device, incorporating AI, of course. So again, we are basically at the beginning of the AI regulation. However, and there's a lot of work going on the regulatory side and also from the standardization side. And what we have not discussed so far, continuous learning algorithms, which do have their own risks and benefits. However, please contact us if you have questions on that one. And yeah, As last but not least, I would like to also introduce you some of our services we provide around medical device, incorporating AI, and the side of trainings, technical meetings, and also technical documentation reviews we do. We do also provide concept evaluation services, and we also provide a TÜV mark for safe use of AI in a medical device application. Yeah, and that's basically all. Thank you very much for your interest, and I hand over back to you, Joe. I hope there are some questions we can discuss on.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much, Abtin, for that really interesting presentation. We do have quite a few questions actually, so I'll go through them, and I mean, hopefully you can certainly understand the questions better than I can. So the first one is 87% of persistent. I think that means precision in diagnosis. The question is remaining risk. Are there any numbers of misdiagnosis of medical doctors?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a very good question, Joe. But I would give you in that case a non-professional response there, because I'm a not medical doctor. But I have one paper. I read that paper regarding the osteoarthritis example, and there's also the example of Google's AI system to identify glaucoma, and basically they are performing way better, way better than medical doctors. However, when it comes to real world scenarios, these advantages are gone in some cases. So honestly, I can't really give you a precise numbers here, but I think that's strongly dependent on the knowledge or experience of the doctor. But to be honest, in most cases, I would rather take a higher risk of a wrong diagnosis by a doctor than from an AI system. But that's my personal. I can't really give you a precise answer on that one.
I think that's probably food for thought and further discussion. Okay, so the second question is, why are we asked questions related to IEC 82304 during technical file review when it is not yet a harmonized standard?
Okay, I see the question. Thank you very much for that question. It doesn't really belong into that presentation, but let me quickly answer that question. So basically, harmonization in Europe is not working anyway. There is no MDR standard being harmonized. So currently, asking for harmonized standard means looking into standards that are, I don't know, 10 to 15 years old. So being asked for 82304 is not a question of having a harmonized standard. It's a question, what is the state of the art? Using harmonized standard, by the way, or any other kind of standard, is not a must. You can choose harmonized standards or common specification to show compliance to the requirements defined in Annex 1 of the regulation, but it's not a must. However, you need to explain how you fulfill requirements that are defined in Annex 1. So, for instance, 82304 is a standard that explains in very general detail how you do the validation. So if you say, well, we don't want to use 82304, which is not a must, then you have to explain to the notified body, whoever it is, how you perform the validation and why you think your approach is better than the state of the art. And state of the art is in most cases what standards are doing, because that standard has been written by the industry and regulators who are representing the state of the art. By the way, let me clarify this one. State of the art is not what the professor is doing in his high technical lab. It's what the industry have decided to be state of the art. 82304 explain also on what you need to notify your users regarding cybersecurity issues. Also, that one is defined in 82304, but not in 62304. So you need to explain to our auditor, whoever, or the regulator who audits. So you need to explain why do you think that what you are doing is better than state of the art if you don't want to use 82304. I hope that answer is what you was looking for.
Yep. I mean, we've got quite a few questions coming in, so I think we'll try and answer a few more, and then perhaps after the webinar we could answer them as an email. But there's one question here which is quite an interesting one. It says some digital health companies are very reluctant to describe their AI algorithms in technical documentation. Can you provide any insights into the level of detail that should be described?
Yeah, so again, thank you very much for this question. Good question. So currently there is unfortunately nothing from the regulator side, and this is the only reference we as a notified body can give you. However, currently if you look at the MDR Annex 2, is it Annex 2? Yeah, it's Annex 2. You have the explanation what should be part of your technical file. So you need to have a description of the AI system. You need to explain the models you are using. You need to explain what data you are using for the training. You need to explain the verification you have done and which milestones. You have to explain when you do the validation. You need to explain to them how you consider usability issues. You need to provide the risk management file, and those risk management file must have risks that are associated with incorporating AI. However, if you really look for something that helps you, what you need to have as part of your documentation, also as part of your overall organizational requirements, I strongly suggest to look at the team and no, it's not here, EGNB, which is unfortunately only available in German. This is the Interschool of Notified Bodies in Germany, and we have written together with the other notified bodies a guidance on what should be considered for AI medical devices. If you look for EGNB in Germany, so Interschool of Notified Body, you will find a document explaining to you what is necessary for a medical device. So we as a notified on our own are not allowed to perform consulting. So I cannot tell you exactly what you need to do, but as an interest group, we are allowed to provide such a guidance, and you will find such a guidance there. So please refer to that site. Use Google Translate. It's working actually quite good when you use the translator app. For instance, Google Translate, and German to English is working quite good, and you should be good with that document. Definitely that should give you an help.
Okay, great. Here's another interesting one. What are the most developed areas in medical devices where AI is applied? Well, that's quite a good question.
Oh, it's a good question. So yeah. I can give you our own experience, but I would rather reference to something which is openly published. So FDA has published a list of devices that has been published by them in recent years, and what they have shown basically the most how you call it, advanced areas where AI is using medical devices, definitely the diagnosis area. So when it comes to diagnostic imaging, so imaging is very highly supported by AI system, and this is basically also our experience. In contrast to FDI, we are not allowed to name their clients due to confidentiality agreement. But if you look at the FDA publication on devices being assessed under AI regulations, so the most one you will find on that list are diagnostic imaging systems. So currently, for instance, as I told you in this example, the 6 most often used systems so for reconstruction of images are AI guided algorithms. So yeah, it's definitely the diagnostic imaging area.
Okay, great. Another question. I mean, we've got quite a few coming in now, so we're definitely going to have to pick this up after the webinar and answer them individually. But I want to hear, are the regulations in the EU only covering medical devices or also health apps?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't hear it.
Yeah, are the regulations in the EU only covering medical devices or also health apps?
When it comes to AI regulation, so the AI regulation is a horizontal regulation, so it covers everything which are considered to be high-risk applications. So atomic reactors, healthcare system, I guess the water system, and medical devices. So everything that is used in the healthcare sector would be considered under the AI regulation, also health apps. When it comes to the medical device regulation, it covers only devices that are under Article 2 of the MDR, a medical device, or Article 2 of IVDR, an in vitro diagnostic device. So there are health apps that are not a medical device. For instance, I don't know, fitness app is not necessarily a medical device, so they are not covered by the medical device regulation. But if there is a medical intended use and it's a medical device covered by the medical device regulation, health apps, however, are used in the healthcare sector and might fall under high-risk devices, so, and by this covered by the proposed AI regulation EU.
Okay, great, thank you. Right, we're coming to the end of the webinar now. We still have some more questions to answer. As I say, I think we will answer them offline afterwards because we don't want to run over. I'm sure many people attending have got another meeting after this. But just it's really interesting to see that what's happening in AI, and I think this is obviously a fastly advancing technology, and particularly where it's been applied. So we'll certainly be having more webinars on this subject, not just in medical devices, but in all of the various different areas of technology that we as a company are involved in. So I would just like to ask any attendees to keep looking at our toughsud.com resource center webpage to understand what further webinars are coming along. So yes, as I mentioned earlier on, we will send copies of the slides and a link to this webinar, so you could watch this again if you would like to do so. But well, just to wrap up, I'd like to thank Abtin again for the presentation, and we will be in touch very, very shortly. So thank you for attending, and everybody have a good day.
Thank you as well. Bye-bye. And if you have further questions, contact us, please.